Good evening, friends and family. So good to have you here tonight. I am blessed. I want to start out with this map of Jerusalem. The date of this is just before the siege, just before the Jerusalem revolt. And I'm going to mention some of these places in tonight's lesson. So I wanted to point them out. First of all, I want to start with, you can see the Hinnom Valley here. I hope you can. It goes all around the south. The Hinnom Valley, of course, was thought to be the entrance to hell. And this is where the fires were burning all the time. This is where the lepers lived, and where people would take all their refuse down into this huge ditch and burn it. So the fires were always burning, and the worm was always turning, as it says in Isaiah. Was it Isaiah? Isaiah 66, the last chapter of Isaiah. Mount of Olives is down here, and notice what's just north, the Essene Quarter. That gives you a real good idea of the people that Yahshua sprung from. And talk is that there was a house down here that belonged to James. And right outside of here, right about there, was a place called Beth Zo, the house of the left hand, where the Essenes who didn't believe in, what shall we say, going to the bathroom in the city of Jerusalem, would all go out to Beth Zo right along here with maybe their little shovels or someplace else here in Hinnom. I noticed that Herod's family tomb is here in Hinnom as well. If you go there today, you're going to see a beautiful grassy meadow with a lot of trees and even picnic tables. Hold on a second, please. I gotta shut this for the noise. Okay. Yes, I have a gigantic party going on in the next room. And let's see, 5 participants. Good, that's just right. City of David over here, that's to the east. Mount of Olives also here and here. In fact, they've got a different name for this one, and I can't remember what it is. Mount Zion is all this part that had the city built upon it. The upper city, and by this time, most of the wealthier Jews lived up in the upper city. In the lower city, the poor people lived, if they could get into Jerusalem. Tyropian Valley, that would be the Valley of Cheesemakers. Tyropian is such a cool word, but it simply means cheesemakers. Upper city, lower city, Siloam Pool, the Hezekiah's tunnel comes out of there, out to here. Hezekiah's tunnel hooks up with the pool of Siloam. And if you've ever walked through Hezekiah's tunnel, it is an experience that you certainly can remember well. You'll never forget it. Kidron Valley. Here's Temple Mount. Some have dispossessed this area of the temple and of the Antonius fortress, saying that it was actually somewhere else. They make good cases for that, with the exception of the theory that Jerusalem was actually in the Nile Valley in Egypt, but that's yet to be proven. Bethesda, the last city to be put up here in Jerusalem, and the northern wall was the last wall to be built. Let's see, is that about take care of it? Can you keep this a little bit in mind? Because we're going to be going around here, the first item that I have for tonight. Okay, I can see you now, or at least you can see me. What a feast for the eyes, right? Going to my notes, and I want to talk first about the Messianic Seal, the artifacts purportedly discovered in a grotto on Mount Zion. You know what I'm talking about? Let's see if I can get a picture. Pretty sure that we can get a pretty good one here. Oh yeah, here's one. 400 magnification. This is the Messianic Seal of the Jerusalem Assembly with an inscription, which I'll mention here in a minute. It's about the size of a brick. It's made out of Jerusalem marble. And you just don't read much about this except by bloggers. This seal I'm talking about and the artifacts that were found with it, because Jewish scholars, Christian scholars, Muslim scholars won't touch it because it hasn't been provenanced, first off, and also because where are these artifacts now? Nobody's sure, since the one that they were delivered to has passed away in 2018. So we'll talk a little about that right now. A little story about some of the very disputed artifacts that you and I, as Nazarene Israelites or something close to that, are familiar with. Why are we familiar with that symbol? Because it has been used in commerce to make money. But that doesn't belay the importance of the symbol if indeed the story we hear about its finding is true. And my internet connection is unstable. Go away. Some date the artifacts to the early 1st century, and some consider them a part of a hoax. But first of all, let me read you a little bit about the seal so I get it right. The Messianic Seal was found etched on eight ancient artifacts. These artifacts were presented to Ludwig Snyder, editor-in-chief of the magazine Israel Today. They were presented to him in 1990. They came from a Greek Orthodox monk and a very aged one whose name was Oticus. He lives as a hermit in the old city of Jerusalem. Oticus said that in the 1960s, he'd single-handedly excavated about 40 such artifacts bearing this Messianic seal from a grotto located in the vicinity of the upper room. Of course, you know that was the Nazarene Assembly headquarters, that building, also housing the tomb of David there on Mount Zion. And what was once the main entrance to the grotto, where they were supposedly found, It's covered up now. I've seen pictures of this, but I suppose if you're in Israel now and any tour group goes around here or around the tomb of David, they might be able to see this. It's covered up by a jail-like heavy wire mesh. And as I said, I've seen it, and there's a gigantic lock on there. And you simply cannot get in there anymore. And who's locked it up? Well, that's another thing nobody knows, but it appears to me it was the Israel Archaeological Bunch, the Israel Archaeological, I can't remember the last word of it. It's locked up. You can't get in there. It's not been excavated any further than what Oedicus says that he did in the 60s. But down there, according to those that have been there, there's an ancient mikvah, that is a baptismal, and that too has been secured with a heavy chain and a lock. The last remaining entry to the grotto was sealed shortly after Oedicus excitedly told the priests at the local monastery about it. Oh, wouldn't they want to open that up and check it out? Evidently not. As I said, these were presented by Oedicus to Ludwig Snyder, the journalist and a Messianic believer. He photographed them. He showed photos of them to the curator of the Israel Museum. And what happened? They said that it was very interesting, but Ludwig Snyder, you want to see him? Yeah, I've got a picture of him. Let's see if I can get it real quick. I'm wondering, is he any family member? Is he in my family? Wouldn't that be something? Where are you, Ludwig? Well, I'm not sure, but right now I'll show you the artifacts. All 8 of them, I believe, are here. These are important artifacts. Hey, it looks to me like these had something to do with oil and maybe Eucharist, communion, lamp. This is an urn, broken, of course. A pedestal, same thing, Messianic seal on there. There's another one I wanted to see. I wanted to look back at this one again because it's got an inscription on it. And evidently what it looks like is that something similar to this urn was placed on top of this brick, because what the inscription says is, for the oil of the Spirit. Oil of the Spirit. And I'm thinking that means whatever was sitting on top of it was full of oil. That's really exciting. So there are the artifacts. Maybe I can still find Ludwig. Here he is. Let's get him off of 400%. Oh, this Zoom ribbon. There he is. You think we look alike? He looks a little more like Professor Smith with hair. So this man is a saint, and his son has been carrying on the ministry there since his father died, since 2018. And I suppose those artifacts, if they are owned by any one person, they must be owned by Ludwig Jr. I have a nice biography for this guy I'd like you to know about. but I'm not going to take time for it now because I have learned time flies. That's me. Okay. Thank you, Vicki. Now, regarding the Israel Museum curator, Ludwig tells us, when he carefully studied my pictures, the curator immediately promised me that these artifacts and their unique symbol were an important find. He told me that the museum already had seen other artifacts bearing the same three-part symbol from some other sources he wouldn't specify. Now, according to Bob Fisher of Olim Creative Products, evidently Ludwig Snyder gave Bob Fisher permission to market this, and I'm glad he did. Otherwise, we know nothing about it. Olim Creative Products. The three-part symbol has been suppressed by various Israeli groups or agencies, such as the Israel Museum, that promised to do something with this and didn't. And Orthodox rabbis, of course, they're in the old city of Jerusalem. According to Fisher, the artifacts were ceremonial pieces that may have been used by James the Just, the first overseer of the Nazarene assembly, or as Jackson Souffrant would say, the congregation of Elohim in Jerusalem, or they may have been used by the 12 apostles. I think one of those apostles that did a lot to evangelize in that time, just past the death of James the Just in 62, Simeon Bar Clopas, also known as the Zealot, Simon the Zealot, may well have written the Didache, that is the rule of the Jerusalem assembly that was discovered 150 years ago, and may well have orchestrated the construction of these objects. One of the artifacts is the brick-sized block I showed you. It's etched with a Messianic seal, as you saw. And what's unique about that is, look here, we've got the menorah, we've got the Star of David, which, my friends, is not a pagan symbol. And the fish, which you saw in the Epistle of Barnabas, talks about the mystery of the fish. This, if you can look close enough, is the letter tau, which looks like RX, which is the letter, I believe it's in Ezekiel 2. So my mind's telling me right now that this was the sign of the true believer, the tau, or like on your keyboard, closest thing to it is a capital X, or as we saw in the letter of Barnabas that we studied Sunday night, a T, a Greek T, is also very similar to the Hebrew tau, which gives us a T sound. And I thought maybe the nursery rhyme, mark it with a T, might have something to do with that. I think so. Le chemin de Ruhan. This is for the oil of the Spirit. It's in Aramaic. Another artifact is a small vial. We looked at that too, who Fisher thinks was placed on the top of the marble stand for oil. Why else would it say for oil if it wasn't for oil? commenting on what he characterized as the monumental importance of this archaeological discovery. Fisher also said, beyond the historical background of the Nazarenes, the Messianic Seal itself proclaims to the world the pervasive Jewishness of who he calls Jesus Christ, Yahshua HaMashiach, and the decidedly Jewish foundation and roots of the church, he says, founded in his name. Seems to me that church is another word we probably ought to chase out of our vocabulary unless we're talking about a Christian church, because as we'll find out later on in this series, the Christian church was very active in hiding, destroying, and casting out anyone who was found with the Nazarean or the Ebionite beliefs up through the first 5 centuries. Can you believe that? I'm wondering just how much was lost. I talk about the burning of codexes and the destruction of inscriptions and the burning of scrolls as well through the first 5 centuries of the Common Era that I had hoped that in the rest of my lifetime, more of those things would pop up out of the ground, as Enoch chapter 103 to 108 kind of prophesies toward, almost not quite. Any comments about the seal? Maybe you have one. I like it. I think it's very good. And what I say about the double triangle not being pagan, well, of course, some pagan religious systems have accommodated it and used it and perverted its meaning. But I'm sure that you have read what it has meant to the early, what we'll call them Jews, that it has meaning. And if we're going to take anything back from the Jews or the Christians, we have to divorce those things from pagan identities. Is the Hebrew at the bottom Proto-Hebrew? No, that is Aramaic. It's Aramaic. I thought first, yeah, this is going to be Paleo-Hebrew, but when I look closely, it's Aramaic. I picked up a couple of the words there. And indeed, Aramaic. Look at the chat just for a minute. What is the shape at the bottom of the inscription? Well, let me take a look at that. If I can find it again. Are we talking about on the brick-like piece of marble, the stand? We will examine it here a little bit. Bring it up. See if we got 500 on here. The pixels are going to diffuse. This is at 800. Definitely, that's a Paleo-Hebrew Tau. No doubt about it, but I don't see anything below that on this one. Well, what you suggest is such a good idea. We don't magnify these things ourselves. We just take for granted whatever they say. Tau, but you can't really see it there. And this is at 800. Wow. It really gives you a different perspective. That one looks like a smiley face. Maybe that's what it is. Does it look to you like these artifacts were forged? These people that are hiding these things probably have not even checked the patina, that is the coating that these inscriptions have accumulated over the years to prove any date. It seems like they're hidden away, and I'm thinking maybe Olim Productions might have something to do with that too, since they've got this symbol copyrighted. What I understand is that you can't even draw pictures of this without breaking a copyright. Okay, Sean, tell us about it.
Oh, no, brother. I was just wondering, has there been any scientific work at all done on it that you're aware of?
Well, I did a
Before
big
they were-
study on this several years ago. I didn't find any. And I did a pretty good study this last week to see if they had updated anything. And no, I can find blogs referring to the book, The Messianic Seal of the Jerusalem Church. That's the name of the little book that describes this, with Ludwig Snyder and Fisher in it, writing about it. But that's all. And blogs, speculation. If you find something, and you may well, it needs to be broadcast around. Excuse me. Now, I'd like to show you another picture as we go on to a different topic. One of the reasons I even want to do this is so that somebody may be interested enough to do some study on their own and find out some of these things. And we've got scholars working on them, but as you just realized, some things they simply don't touch. At the beginning, I mentioned this cheap volume here by our friend Jeffrey J. Boots, B-U-T-Z, entitled The Secret Legacy of Jesus, the Judaic teachings that passed from James the Just to the founding fathers and everywhere since. It's an excellent introduction to this, and this is the second in a series. The first one is called something like James, the brother of Jesus, that talks more about the Desposyni, as does this book. And the thing that's really interesting to me in The Secret Legacy is reading about how influential Nazarean, Ebionite Judaism was in making up Islam. In fact, if we look to the Quran and look to the words of James and the other things we have from the Nazarenes, it's hard not to see that the whole basis of Muhammad's writings was Ebionite Christianity. You read, I shouldn't call it, sorry, Ebionite Judaism? I don't even know if we should call it that. I don't know what to call it. But reading the passages in the Quran that could come from nowhere else, but there may be even a source like the Gospel of the Hebrews, and knowing that as time went on, especially in the first 5 centuries of the Common Era, these other religions were scattering what was left of the Ebionites, the poor, ever eastward. ever eastward toward Nabatea and what was called at that time Arabia, even to Afghanistan and Iran, of course. That's where they were sent when they were persecuted. That's where the Ebionites were exiled, and Elkassaites and the Nazarenes that were left. They all went east. And then I have also read regarding the biography of Muhammad, the first, when he was formulating this and getting these visions from Allah, which simply means Elohim in Aramaic. It's not really a name. When he was formulating them, he traveled around to numerous Ebionite settlements, Elkassite settlements, Nazarene settlements that were on the border of what was Arabia at that time, and picked up knowledge from them. And isn't that something, that the same knowledge that the Ebionites already knew was the knowledge that Allah revealed to Muhammad? It's striking. It really is. This book tells you a little about that. So here is the Pella map to see where it is, because we're going to Pella now. Jerusalem, Qumran down here. If you go straight up northeast, outside of Israel, you find Pella. And one thing that was striking to me, that I found this when I was studying the map. I do this kind of stuff, studying all the time. I like to do that. I don't like to do much else either, except go to the local, the local surplus grocery here. If you go straight from Jerusalem through Pella and on up, about the same distance. I may have another map here. Yeah. Jerusalem over the Jordan River, here at the Decapolis. Here's Gadara. You remember what happened there. And Gerasa, almost the same thing happened in these two places. And you buzz on up, and you've got the bloody cup. Damascus, Damascus, that's talked about time after time in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I'm thinking, since we know that the Nazarenes and Ebionites not only went to Pella when they fled Jerusalem during the war, but a large colony remained in Pella. I think it was destroyed by some natural disaster, and these Nazarenes, these Ebionites took over. And yes, I'm going to talk about the difference between these sects. I think it's coming up next time. I think they might have said in Jerusalem, let's go on up toward Damascus. And there's Pella. Maybe they're talking about Pella when they're talking about desert camps that they went to refresh themselves. And of course, Damascus, if you remember, was not in the hands of the Herods, who was a bitter enemy of them, though he was a great friend of the Essenes. Oh, I'm sorry, the map isn't up here. Let me try again. Now, there it is. Jerusalem toward Damascus. And there we are. Going right through Pella. It looks like a third, a third, a third. And here, Caesarea Philippi, you remember maybe from the scripture, from the Gospels, what happened there. That's when they were at the mouth of Baal, the place of the worship of Pan. The place is still called Panias or Banias. When Yahshua asked Kepha, who do folks say I am? Standing in front of the mouth of Baal, where all the pagan worshipers went on their pilgrimage. And if I remember right, just beyond that mouth of Baal was the spring that David swam in. I hope that was true, because I swam in it too. The spring was a big spring. Hold on a minute. I want to show you the mouth of Baal. It was a big old spring, and the water was 65 degrees all the time. And that doesn't sound very cold, but brother and sister, when you get in there, it is cold. Yeah, I've got a bunch of pictures of the mouth of Baal that I want you to see. Here's an old one. Let's see if I can change the screen sharing. Oh, I love doing this, talking about this stuff. I'm so glad a couple other people like it too. See if we can get this thing bigger. Yeah, this is an artist's conception of what the mouth of Baal looked like in the time of Yahshua. It just looks like here's a couple of temples. You can't even see the entrance to the cave. Here are niches. You're to have their idols in the niches, go worship them. Here's where they probably lit candles to Mary. Here's maybe the restroom. All right, that is an artist's conception. Now let's take a look at the real thing as it looks today, because it is rather frightening. I'm sorry, I got a lot of windows open. Yeah. Give me just a little more time. Here. Marcel, is that you and Gina? There, at the mouth of Baal. Make this a little bigger. And certainly you've heard me tell you the story of this before. In the last picture, you saw a temple built up around this. The story goes from the Jewish Apocrypha. I'm not sure which one, I'd like to know though, that when the 200 plus angels fell, that they hit the top of Mount Hermon, where this is. This is a cave in Mount Hermon, and they busted clear through the mountain and came out here, blew out this part of the mountain. So this was a place that was very sacred to pagans. And really looking at it in person, it really looks like a big old devilish mouth with teeth and everything else, with these things as eyes, Clopas. Wow, wow, wow. Okay, I should get back to my head. So Pella, also called Pahil or Tavfet Fahal, in our today's maps, mostly the ones I've seen say Pella. The flight from ancient sources. So, as you may know, the Nazarenes and the Desposyni and the Ebionites fled Jerusalem sometime before or during the revolt of 66 to 73. Probably, as you will recall, General Cestius, with his legions, came to Jerusalem to get rid of the Zealots there, and they were able to get in. But for no reason that was recorded, they left. And they followed the coast up to their headquarters in Caesarea, up north. And when they got to the place called Megiddo, they began to get picked off. The Zealots, the Sicarii, the Jewish troops were up there waiting for them, and there was a narrow pass there between the sea and Megiddo. And there was a valley there called Armageddon. And what was found there just a few years ago was a Roman fortress in Armageddon. For years, they said there's no Roman artifacts in here. Don't worry. But this was just found. I need to look that up again. Things don't stay in my mind very long anymore, but General Cestius lost his entire army almost, though he made it out to get up to Capernaum, and he had a very sad story to tell the Emperor Nero, who was in Greece at that time, singing. And according to Josephus, Cestius sent a particularly famous persona of that time to Greece to tell Nero in person. Who was that person? Do you remember that he sent? Why, of course, he sent Saulos, who we imagine is Paul. Too much in common between Paul in his own letters and the gang leader Saulos in Josephus. So here Cestius sends maybe Paul, probably Paul, Saulos to Greece to tell Nero some bad stories, and then General Cestius disappears. There's a new general in charge then, and that is a guy named Vespasian. And that is the story, my friend, but there's a lot more to it. So there are ancient witnesses to the exodus of believers from Jerusalem to Pella. And I think, Sean, you and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, trying to imagine what a difficult journey that would have been after the war started to go from Jerusalem safety for a little while up through an Israel that had already been destroyed or was being destroyed at that time by Vespasian, to a city, Pella, in the Decapolis, that the inhabitants there hated Jews. Where are they going to end up? And you remember how we put the cap on that. But let's see what happens here. It is said by Eusebius, the church historian, the people of the church in Jerusalem, he says ecclesia. He writes in Greek. The people of the ecclesia in Jerusalem were commanded by an oracle. Who was the head of the refugees from Jerusalem that got to Pella? Simon Zealotes, Simon bar Clopas, brother or cousin to James and Yahshua. That is Yaakov HaZadik, and his cousin, probably cousin or his brother maybe, was the leader of the gang to get them through Roman lines and Roman cities and through all that devastation and keep them eating. Try again. The people of the ecclesia in Jerusalem were commanded by an oracle, that is a prophecy, given by revelation before the war to those in the city who were worthy of it, to depart and dwell in one of the cities of Perea, which they called Pella. To it, those who believed on Messiah traveled from Jerusalem, so that when holy men had altogether deserted the royal capital of the Jews and the whole land of Judea, they had to get out. Except in Jerusalem, they tarried, thinking that no one would be able to get over those three walls. But they were wrong. And an oracle comes along, probably, as I said, just after Cestius was ransacked and his army, and before, or maybe just at the beginning of when Vespasian brought his legions in to Israel to get out of there. You remember Yahshua's oracle about the same thing in Matthew 24, Luke 19, and Mark chapter 13. Epiphanius says about this heresy of the Nazarenes, and Azaraeanes. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 A's in that word. Not to be confused with the Nazarenes or the Nazoreans. They're all different groups. And this saying, the heresy of the Nazarenes, is right out of Acts 24:5. You've got somebody there, Festus or the governor or somebody, talking about Saulos, Paul, being the ringleader of the Nazarenes. The heresy of the Nazarenes. In the Greek, it's heresy. Look it up, Acts 24:5, if you want. So again, this heresy of the Nazarenes exists in Berea, in the neighborhood of Cilicia, that is Lower Syria, and the Decapolis, in the region of Pella, says Epiphanius, and in Basanitis, in the so-called Cocaba, the Star District, Cocaba, Star. From there, it took its beginning after the Exodus from Jerusalem, when all the disciples went to live in Pella because Christos had told them to leave Jerusalem and go away, since it would undergo a siege. Remember, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, don't be pregnant then. Because of this advice, they lived in Perea after having moved to that place, as I said. Well, if you look on your map sometime, there's a place called Salem up there. I think it's Salem. E-M like the cigarette, Salem. There's a place called Salem up there that John the Baptist, when he was hunted down to Beth Abara, just east and over the border, over the east side of the Jordan from Jerusalem and Qumran. Yeah, they chased him out of there, and he went to Salem up north on the same side of the Jordan to baptize. It's amazing to me how Pella is so close to Salem, where the New Testament tells us John went. John baptized, so it speaks to us in two different places, Bethabara and Salem. For after all those, wait a minute, did I miss some? Right, because, yeah, in Perea. And one thing that I've learned here lately is that through the centuries, those first 5 especially, through the persecution of Jews, Romans, and most of all Roman Christians, that's where the primitives ended up to become one of the major, if not the major influence in the formation of Islam. Now, what we know today are these Islamic terrorists and their jihad. But that wasn't the Islam to start with at all. It'd be nice to learn more about that. I would like to. I know here in this town an expert on Islam. Let's see if I can get him here. Maybe you know him. Rabbi Dan Naif. We did a couple interviews on hell back some years ago. For after all those who believed in Christos had generally come to live in Perea, in a city called Pella of the Decapolis, of which is written in the gospel that it is situated in the neighborhood of the region of Batanea and Basanitis. Go look them up. Again, that comes from Epiphanius Panarion, his medicine chest of heresies. And another piece from Epiphanius on weights and measures. So Aquila, and I don't know who that is he's talking about. Aquila, maybe the one in the Bible, I don't know. While he was in Jerusalem, also saw the disciples of the apostles, flourishing in the faith and working great signs, healings, and other miracles. You're going to read a lot about them if you happen to pick up my second volume of the Nazarene Acts, because I've found more Clementine type histories, especially of Peter and Paul, that I'm going to publish this. I'll probably start serializing a little bit on YouTube. So this is a perfect companion to the Nazarene Acts. I've been editing just every minute I had lately, and my faith is great. My faith is great. You've got to keep in the scriptures. If you're tired of the New Testament, hey, plenty of more. Just ask me. For when the city was about to be taken and destroyed by the Romans, it was revealed by an angel in advance. Now he says, an angel to all the disciples should remove from the city as it was going to be completely destroyed. They sojourned as emigrants in Pella, the city above mentioned in Transjordan. Trans means across the Jordan River, Transjordania. And this city is said to be of the Decapolis on weights and measures. Now, a little more about Pella itself and the caves, especially. Yes, caves have been found there. Yes, archaeological tours have been set up to go through those caves to see what they can find and to map them. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put a little picture of the caves on, because I want to talk about these caves first. And our time's getting up here pretty soon. If I can find that, yeah, here we go. Anybody left? The only place they could have stayed was in the caves, unless somehow they bribed the people of the city not to kill them. During that invasion by Vespasian and Titus, all Israel was flattened. They had shock and awe. They had shock and awe. These guys had to go and end up in a place where Jews of any kind were hated in the Decapolis. Remember, that was pagan place where they ate pigs. You remember from Mark chapter 5. All right, what am I? I'm having a little trouble doing two things at once. There. Here's the cave map, Pella Hinterland Survey, 1996. About 10 feet above one tunnel system, the archaeological team found a second series of rock cavities. I'm going to look at that again. Okay, what? One is higher than the other, 10 feet higher than the other. What a scary, scary place to be. These caves were partly natural, partly hewn, consisting of a series of large, roughly rounded chambers between 10 by 10 feet and 15 by 15 feet, pretty consistent, connected together by narrow passageways. I've been also listening to fiction at night. Hieronymus Bosch by, is it John Connolly? Those stories about police inspectors. And this guy, this fictional character, Bosch, when he was young, he was assigned to go down into all these caves of the North Vietnamese that they found in and around Da Nang and other places. He had to go down there, and there's a lot in one of the books about that and just how absolutely scary it is, and about some of the soldiers that had to go down there that just plain went crazy. Not to mention the ones that were killed down there, and they never left a Marine behind. And so they have to send some newbies in there to go find them, bring their bodies out, unless, of course, they were still alive. Wow. Same way with this. But if I had the choice, I wouldn't go up to space, but I would go looking around these caves. They were full of bat guano. And there were serious health issues with prolonged exposure to the cave dust. In one cave complex, this is 667, this complex on top looks like an intestine, actually. There were 5 large chambers with short connecting passageways. In complex 668, there were traces of 4 smaller chambers and interconnections. In all, 12 chambers are documented. As strings of connected rooms, these complexes penetrated deep under the rock escarpment. I think there's a, yeah, sheer cliff face here. Cliff face here. It's hard to imagine what that's all about by just looking at that. Forming a series of hewn and columned rooms, well provisioned with lamp niches and sleeping benches. That's what they found here in 96. Airflow and light were ensured by wide porch-like galleries that opened onto the sheer north face of the wadi, that is the swamp, completely inaccessible from the wadi bottom, some 125 feet below. Entranceways into these caves were small, concealed, easily defended. They seemed unrelated to any nearby roads or other surface features, suggesting that their construction and use was unrelated to the settled area located some 1,600 feet away. We're going to look at that area in a minute. Oh, maybe now. I think you looked at that cave enough. Let's see. Stop the share. Yeah, there's one I really want to show you. A lovely photograph. See if I can find it. Ah, yes, this one, I found it. Undoubtedly, the gang saw something like this. This is near, right outside of Pella, near the spring Kareth. And I'm just guessing, I don't know, but it looks like caves would be up here or on back. But I thought this place could look lovely. Let me see. Jordan near Pella. Okay. I thought it was the brook Kareth that was there, but no, I'm wrong there. I think I've got one more of the ruins, if I could find them. Getting close. Yeah. Here it is. This photograph looks to me like ruins from the Byzantine period. That is, after the capital, Rome, switched over to Byzantium in Turkey. They call it the Eastern Empire. That had to be, well, in Constantine's time in the 4th century, they actually did that because the name of the city, capital city, was Constantinople. Now it's Istanbul, and that's named after a god. But for quite some time, the Byzantine Empire was a very peaceful and gracious place that we might have lived. You can see these are Byzantine Corinthian columns, or maybe Roman columns. In the synagogue at Capernaum, beside Peter's house, you can see on the Jewish synagogue something unusual. The ruins also contain Greek and Roman columns. And look here, that is a Roman arch. How would you like to go down there? Wow. A lot of stuff to see in this, but this is the ruins of ancient Pella, and I wouldn't doubt that Elohim destroyed it, but as long as Pella was in business, the Ebionites were there. The remnants of the Nazarenes were there. And we might have been there if we were a little older now. Am I going to get through Pella? I'm going to go to the chat momentarily. Unfortunately, there's nothing in this cave system that could date it. The cave had been often reused, and with each succeeding occupant clearing away any previous debris. So in the absence of any carved inscriptions or occupational deposits, the scant dating evidence of these cave systems must remain tantalizingly circumstantial. However, they are the best candidates for an archaeological echo of the early Ebionite community at Pella. But why Pella? There may have been some local connection between Galilean leaders of the early Nazorean movement and prominent citizens of Pella. There were Jews there, although, as I mentioned, Josephus, who writes this somewhere around 80 or 70, the War of the Jews, said that there was nobody left there. For Pella is 20 miles south of the Sea of Galilee. 20 miles. The New Testament makes it clear that the northern Jordan Valley region was familiar territory for the predominantly Galilean assembly leaders. The New Testament indicates that some of John the Baptist's earlier missionary work may have taken place in the northern Jordan Valley and not just in the southern Jordan Valley. Yeah, that's the Salem or Salem. More practically, 3 of the best crossing points in the northern Jordan Valley fall within the territory of Pella, with Galilee itself already devastated and occupied by Romans after the start of the revolt in 66 AD. Pella might have seemed the safest short-term bet in a very difficult neighborhood. Finally, a few bits of evidence imply an abiding early Nazorean, N-A-Z-A-R-A-E-A-N, that's the 5A, Nazarene presence at Pella. The apologist Aristo of Pella, he was early, 2nd century. He came from Pella, implying a significant Messianic presence there. Later, Christian historians like Eusebius made clear that Pella was considered a wellspring of early Ebionite thought, which was later condemned as a heresy by the Byzantine authorities. That's the Greek Orthodox theological pundits. If the early believers fled from Jerusalem to Pella, they may have been the beginning of a major presence at that site. But one thing that's really worth noting here is that we are told by trustworthy authorities that after 2 or 3 years in Pella, the Ebionite Nazarenes, whatever they call themselves, I don't know, the way, made their way back to Jerusalem. Jews had been cast out of there. but they were able to go back in, go back to Mount Zion, go back to the ruination of the tomb of David and their other properties there and rebuild them and live there until the next Messiah came along, Bar Kokhba, in about 132 AD. So that would give them 70, say 72 to 132. That's 50 years. They had 50 years there before they had to get out. And as you recall, their Messiah, Bar Kokhba, son of the star, or his real name was Bar Kosiba, which is not a very good word. I can't remember what it means. But he couldn't get these people to fight. He couldn't even muster them in. He couldn't draft them in. They simply wouldn't do it. So he called for the death of all the Nazarenes. And believe it or not, that letter from Bar Kokhba to his general was found in the cave of letters. Yeah, cave of letters, and is available to us to read online if we look it up. What was the name of the woman's letters from her whole life that were found there? Babitha. If you're interested in reading those letters, it'll be challenging. Look it up on Google, or if you haven't used chat on the intelligent chat GPT, there it is, com yet, ask that guy. He'll not only read them out for you, he'll translate them for you and give you all kinds of information on them. For people like me, that's a really good thing. But for people like Biden, John Kerry, not so good. King Charles III, not so good, because of how they would be used. They could just destroy everything. Put the brakes on it, my friends. All right, I'm going to look at the chat and then we shall go. Oh, Vicky, very good. Is it at Cave of Letters? It's one of those three caves there. Huh. Vicky, this about the Salem, who knows? That's a good inquiry. I think the Abraham Salem was Jerusalem, but you see, Salem, shalom, means peace. But there was also a Canaanite god by that name. And originally, Jerusalem was called Salem after the Jebusite god. You want a photo of Ludwig? They don't know what's under the collapsed areas, because I suppose these university types were scared to go in there. Ah, Sean, definitely. Under the guano. Are you volunteering? You can probably go. The roof collapse. Wow. Let those in Yehuda flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of her go out, and let not those who are in the fields enter her. Very good. That's in Luke 21. What did I say, 19? I knew it was in 21. Yes, patina. Speaking of that, It's what proved that the James ossuary was from the same tomb known as the Jesus family tomb. Somebody stole the James tomb, and it was in the IIA storage warehouse. And they wondered, we got the whole family of Jesus in the Jesus family tomb. Where's James? So they saw that on James' ossuary, there was a rose-colored stain on the marble or limestone, that it was made from, a rose-colored stain. And somebody, I think the naked archaeologist or James Tabor or somebody that was down there dealing with this, that believed in the Talpiot tomb, had it patinized and found that the patina on both of them was exactly the same. See, there was something rose-colored leaking into that tomb. And I think that it was on the walls, it came through the water. The tomb had been broken into earlier on, and something, probably tainted water or rose-colored water, came in there. Or if Wyatt was still alive, he'd say it was the blood of Jesus came in there. Right when they were filming the movie Ben-Hur. Remember the end of that movie? That's worth watching the whole thing just to see the end of it. Looking. What kings are you talking about?
The other kings that were
Salem?
with Salem and Abraham, all those other kings.
You would appreciate the Jebusite hypothesis. There's another great mystery that would, if Judaism would even acknowledge its existence, would turn it on its head. Really.
Is there information online about that?
That's one of the things I used the Chat GPT for. Nobody tells you anything about the Jebusite hypothesis, which I don't want to get into now. But from this place and that place, and from some books, I found little things about it, and I started to do some speculating. This has to do with Melchizedek and Zadok the priest and David and Yahshua and all the family trees up until the present time. And so I asked the artificial intelligence in that box about it. What do you know? And it gave me a nice essay. And I said, what else do you know? And more. And then I asked questions and more and more. I've got about maybe 5 or 6 essays now on the Jebusite hypothesis. Unfortunately, no, it is a hypothesis. And even Chat GPT said that scholars, very few scholars believe it. However, in a recent book, I read that the scholars are turning around. Basically what it is, okay, I'll tell you and then I'll quit. Basically what it is that Melchizedek, the king of Salem, was a Jebusite, because in Jerusalem, such as it was, well, it was called Jebus after the people that lived there, Jebusites. And so Melchizedek is there, and 1,000 years later, David conquers Jebus. And what does he do? He takes the high priest of the Jebusite religion, whose name was Zadok the priest, and brings him over, and he becomes the number one priest, the high priest for throughout the rest of David's reign and Solomon's reign. The lower priest, David had two priests for a long time until Abimelech is his name, Abi something, was fired because he was in a conspiracy against David. And so what that means is the Levitical line, if it's true, from Zadok clear up through all the Zadokite priests until the end of them were not Levitical. Were not Levitical. Did you hear that? They were not Levitical. After the fact, in the last Old Testament book to be written, they were written in as offspring of Levi. They were written in Chronicles, but not in the early ones. Wow. Okay, Drugsma, do you want me to put a picture of you up here? What do you say? You got your hand raised up.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to get with you. I've been on that same line for quite a while.
Yes, you've been working on this.
Yeah, and there's some things that go all the way back to the Torah that kind of line up with this. You get into it in the book of Numbers about who David really, or the Judah. There's the prophecy in Genesis where it talks about the scepter will not depart Judah till Shiloh comes, and that's basically running all the way through the Torah, and then it's really fulfilled in David, or basically in the house of David. But when you get into the first few chapters of Samuel, it talks, in my understanding, it pretty much does away with the house of Levi, and then it confirms that in Kings. And when you get into Chronicles, there's a lot of things that differ from Samuel. And I wanted to talk with you sometime when you get time to maybe talk about it, and I'd like to maybe share some more with you on it. So,
brother, you need to teach me. Do you have these notes written in? Do you have notes on this? You do. Send me some.
Yeah, I can pretty much know all in my head. I just need to just go back and put all the scriptures together.
Okay. I've researched it from the Egypt side, not from the Levitical side. I'd love to hear about that. And I don't know, you're a teacher of Israel. Do you think you could put together a teaching on this and give it to us? A lot of us.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll start working on it, and
Okay.
I'll let you know when I'm getting close to the end. So, and then I kind of want to, before I present it, I want to kind of run most of it by you, and the main points and the scriptural points, to see what you think before I present it. Okay.
I'd love to learn. Yes, yes. You hear that? We're going to learn something about this mystery.
Gosh, I want to sit in on that. Can I? I'll be real quiet.
Of course you can. All right. Greg, whenever you get ready, don't tarry.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah.
Do not tarry, my friend. Greg is our human Israelite in Texas. You know the Texas song? No, that one. I was thinking of all my exes.
I thought you were going to say he's our human Israeli and artificial intelligence.
I just remember I was so intrigued when we were talking about this. I did a thing on it of some of the stuff I knew, but like Greg, Drugsma, there's so much stuff, and it's here, there, and everywhere. And when you get to be a little older, you'll find after strokes and heart attacks and everything else that you just don't remember so well. That's why on my messages, I manuscript them. And besides, my first preaching teacher was a Unitarian Universalist, and he said, always manuscript your messages, because if it took enough time to research them, they're worth keeping. And as they were anointed at first, they will be anointed again. Look at hymns, for instance, old hymns. I mean, old hymns going back. Still, when they're brought up, especially in this climate of charismatic choruses, you get real strong theology. Oh. All right. I'm holding you too long here. Wise advice, yes. Unitarian Universalist, pretending to be a Lutheran, to pretending to be a United Methodist, taught that in the first Methodist preaching class. Okay, my friends, thank you for coming out tonight. I really wasn't expecting anybody. I was going to do this alone. And it's just so much better when you've got people responding. Until Thursday.